Easy Explain, Quine, and the Web of Belief. So here looking at Willard Van Orman Quine, commonly known as W.V.O. Quine, who lived from 1908 through the year 2000. He was an American, known for his work in analytic philosophy and pragmatic philosophy, sometimes working in both at once. Pretty well known in his time, even still today, left quite a legacy, is known for many things. One of them is his work and his concept of the web of belief. That's what we're going to be focusing on here in this video. So to do so, we're really going to be considering selections from two essays, really even largely just one essay. I threw on what there is in there just for one of his most well-known quotes. We're really going to be spending time looking at two passages from two Dogmas of Empiricism, though. That's the big one. And there's also a third worth mentioning. We're not going to dive into it here, but he has another very well-known essay called Natural Kinds. So, if you are curious about actually diving into Quine on your own, I think those three essays are a great place to start. But first, on what there is, really, starting to put him on the big map here. Big famous quote coming from Quine, kind of providing a new definition for what it means to be. So he says, to be is to be the value of a variable. Taken out of context, it's kind of hard to understand in full. You can grapple with it a little bit. Do with that what you will, but I do think if I was going to take any time to spend making a video on Quine, I felt like I had to include that bit of his. But now let's get into two Dogmas of Empiricism, where we're going to really outline his concept of the web of belief. If you've been following along, we've touched on this briefly in some videos on Bertrand Russell, and how maybe he was laying some of the ground strands for this concept. But here it is in Quine's words. So Quine says, the totality of our so-called knowledge or beliefs, from the most casual matters of geography and history to the profoundest laws of atomic physics, or even of pure mathematics and logic, is a man-made fabric which impinges on experience only along the edges. Right? This is where we start to get the fabric, the web, experience around the edges, but what's going on in the core, right? That's what we're going to start building on here. Or to change the figure, total science is like a field of force whose boundary conditions are experience, right? So the web, like a force field, science, all knowledge, right? Only along the edges are what we're continually experiencing anew. So he goes on, a conflict with experience at the periphery occasions readjustments in the interior of the field at the core of the web. Truth values have to be redistributed over some of our statements. Reevaluation of some statements entails reevaluation of others because of their logical interconnections. The logical laws being in turn simply certain further statements of the system, certain further elements of the field. Right? So if we change one thing, there's going to be ripple effects through that field, through that web, based on how they're related, based on how they connect. If one thing is true, what does it mean? What else has to be true, right? So we're going to have to maybe reconstruct this web from time to time. Quine goes on. Having reevaluated one statement, we must reevaluate some others, whether they be statements logically connected with the first, or whether they be the statements of logical connections themselves. Maybe even logical laws need to be reconsidered and redefined, reevaluated. To continue, but the total field is so undetermined by its boundary conditions, those of experience, that there is much latitude of choice as to what statements to reevaluate in the light of any single contrary experience. So this is where our pragmatic, rational abilities come in, how we analyze things and rebuild our web of belief, construct our truths and our knowledge. So to wrap up this passage, Quine says, no particular experiences are linked with any particular statements in the interior of the field, except indirectly through considerations of equilibrium affecting the field as a whole, right? So this is going to be up to us. This is our task. This is our project. When we have a new experience, if it conflicts with something in our web of belief, something in our field, it's up to us to figure out how to make those repairs, reevaluations, and rejudgments. This is about a paragraph later in Two Dogmas of Empiricism. Quine continues, any statement can be held true come what may if we make drastic enough adjustments elsewhere in the system. Even a statement very close to the periphery can be held true in the face of recalcitrant experience by pleading hallucination or by amending certain statements of the kind called logical laws. Just going to keep going here. He says, conversely, by the same token, no statement is immune to revision. That's huge. Revision even of the logical law of the excluded middle, which, to recap, is everything must either be or not be, right? That's the logical law of the excluded middle. has been proposed as a means of simplifying quantum mechanics. Right, so no statement is immune to revision. I think that's a big takeaway from this concept of the web of belief, that if you experience something new, it's contradictory, we might have to reconsider the entire web. To end this essay, Quine says that each man is given a scientific heritage, plus a continuing barrage of sensory stimulation. And the considerations which guide him in warping his scientific heritage to fit his continuing sensory promptings are, where rational, pragmatic. So that's how he wraps things up there. I think it's a good one. So then, again, if you've been following along, to tie this into Russell's quote-unquote web of belief, going back to his work, The Problems of Philosophy from 1912, I've kind of gone through these elsewhere in other videos in the Analytic Philosophy playlist, but the first one is in Chapter 2, The Existence of Matter. So I'm not going to read this here. Feel free to pause, take a look at it, though. Otherwise, go check out the video that covers Chapter 2 in the Analytic Philosophy playlist. And he comes back to this again in Chapter 11 on intuitive knowledge. Again, I've gone through this in the video that covers Chapter 11 in the Analytic Philosophy playlist, but here it is again. Feel free to pause, check it out again. So I do think there's a connection here. There's definitely some kind of influence, especially looking at philosophy as a continual progression and development of human thought through history. But for now, as an overview of Quine and his concept of the web of belief, hope this helps.